Welcome back to Dan Recaps. Today, I'm going to explain the movie Isabelle, released in the year 2018. At the start of the movie, we meet Matthew Kane and his pregnant wife Larissa as they move into their new house, which happens to be right next to an unfriendly woman named Anne. There seems to be some tension between the normally happy couple, as Larissa knew Matt wanted to wait a few more years before starting their family, though he assures her that he is happy with the changes in their life and is excited to be a father. The next morning, while having breakfast, Matt's dad Clifford comes over for a visit with lots of presents for the baby. He confides in his dad that although he didn't feel ready at first, he has come around to the idea of being a father, but now worries he might not be as capable a parent as Clifford was to him. But his dad assures him that he will make a great dad. After Matt leaves for work, Larissa meets their neighbor Anne in the driveway and starts telling her about the baby. But Anne remains distracted by her daughter Isabelle, who is waiting for her back in the house. Just then, Larissa feels an intense pain and starts bleeding. Worried for the baby, she is rushed to the hospital, where things quickly escalate, leading to Larissa's death. She is eventually resuscitated, but unfortunately, they are unable to save her unborn baby. The doctors break the news to Matt that his child has died and warns him to be gentle with Larissa, as the trauma of dying and losing her child could cause severe mental and emotional changes for her. When Larissa wakes up, she finds Matt in her room with a priest. She asks about the baby, but cannot accept what has happened. She demands to see her baby, and when they bring out its lifeless body, she becomes consumed by her grief. That night, Larissa has a nightmare where her baby comes back to life. The couple meets with a therapist to discuss these nightmares and her experience of dying and coming back to life. The therapist thinks that dreams are a result of her trauma, while Larissa shares she saw something unusual when she was dead, but won't yet share what it was. Returning to their home, Larissa becomes upset seeing Anne standing at her door, acting suspiciously. At night, Larissa goes into the nursery they had all set up for her baby, while Isabelle watches her through the window. She is still completely consumed with grief and lashes out at Matt for seemingly having such an easy time with the experience. He tells her he is equally devastated, but she refuses to believe him, and he leaves her alone. Larissa later meets another neighbor named Ruth, who shares her condolences for their loss. Larissa asks about the neighbor girl, Isabelle, and Ruth tells her she is wheelchair-bound and spends most of her time in front of the window. Coming back inside, Larissa hears a child crying from the nursery and rushes to see her baby, only to realize it was just her imagination and her child is still dead. Larissa becomes fixated on this little girl, always staring at her through the window, and begins to snoop around for information about Isabelle. She discovers that Isabelle is a survivor of sexual abuse, as her stepfather used to assault her as a part of his satanic rituals. Becoming overwhelmed by her hallucinations, Larissa finally tells Matt what she saw when she was dead. She explains after everything went black, she saw something grab her and try to pull her down into the fire, and when she tried to scream, nothing came out. Matt tries to comfort her, while Isabelle continues to watch through the window. When Larissa notices Matt growing concerned over her deteriorating mental condition, she tries to behave normally, but becomes irritated by the constant spying from Anne and Isabelle next door. One day, she sees someone's reflection in the mirror and hears a baby in the nursery. When she rushes to see, and again finds nothing there, she completely unravels and attempts to kill herself by jumping from the window, but Ruth sees her. At the hospital, Matt discloses to the doctors that this isn't her first attempted suicide, having previously tried to take her life at 16 after the death of her father. Growing more and more concerned, Matt goes back to the priest and asks if he thinks possessions are real, believing there is something very strange happening with his wife. The priest brushes it off as a result of the trauma, but when Matt pressures him further, he agrees to pay the family a visit. Matt then says a prayer with a priest before we see Anne, who is also praying to God for his help in getting rid of this evil. When the priest comes to visit the next day, he asks Larissa if she thinks the devil is with her, but she tells him she is just mourning the loss of her child and nothing else. As the priest leaves, he spots Anne outside, who quickly hides from him before hurting herself, saying she must be punished for her sins. Later, Matt explains Larissa's condition to her sister Jessica. She comes over to the house to take Larissa to a healer named Pedro. On meeting Pedro, he explains to them that when Larissa died, she crossed through the door that separates life from death, and now she is hyper-attuned to the dead. He also tells them a spirit is reaching out to her and is determined not to leave, so Larissa must stay strong and be sure to not let it in. Jessica drops Larissa back off at home and says goodbye. Afterwards, Larissa notices Isabelle spying again and becomes furious, walking over to Anne's house and threatening to take legal action if her daughter doesn't leave them alone, and then goes to Isabelle's room to try and talk to her, but when Isabelle hurts her mother, she leaves the house as we see Isabelle rise up from her wheelchair. Larissa's paranoia continues to intensify, beginning to constantly feel Isabelle watching her everywhere she goes. Then walking into the nursery, she finds Isabelle standing in the middle of the room, staring at her with blood-red eyes. She slams the door and rushes to call the police, but soon finds Isabelle is back in her wheelchair in the house next door. Matt returns home to find Larissa compulsively cleaning the house, complaining about a horrible smell that won't go away. She tries to tell him that Isabelle broke into their house, but when he doesn't believe her, she lashes out at him, claiming he doesn't understand her. That night, Isabelle appears in their room. Larissa seems to sense her presence and wakes Matt up, asking him to check the security cameras. The whole time, Isabelle stares at him, but he can't seem to see her. After finding nothing unusual on the security cameras, Matt comes back to bed, assuring his wife that there is no one in the house. But she gets up and goes downstairs to check herself, finding Isabelle back at the window. The next day, while searching into Isabelle's past, Matt also learns about her abusive stepfather Frank, who claimed that the devil was inside her. After returning home from their child's funeral, Larissa begins to pack up the nursery, but again notices the strange smell in the room. When she looks up and sees that Isabelle is not in her window, she grabs a gun and starts searching around the house. In the bedroom, she finds the girl wearing a wedding dress. Larissa threatens to kill her, but Isabelle attacks. When Larissa looks up again, she is alone in the room, but Isabelle is seen back in the window, laughing at her. When Matt comes home, Larissa opens up about her fear of losing her mind, saying that before her dad killed himself, he mentioned hearing noises as well. After his death, her mother told Larissa she was sick just like her father and abandoned her. And now that she is losing her grip on reality, she is scared that Matt will divorce her and abandon her too. But Matt says he loves her and promises to never leave. That night, Larissa screams after seeing Isabelle in their bed, but Matt still cannot see the girl. The next morning, Matt visits Larissa's psychiatrist again, who advises him that she is a danger to herself and those around her and should be admitted to the hospital. Next, Matt goes to meet Pedro, who warns him that the spirit senses that Larissa no longer values her life and wants to take it from her out of jealousy. Matt doesn't want to accept this, but Pedro is adamant that they must bring her back to the gate between life and death and force her to choose life this time. Otherwise, he will lose her forever. Matt returns home to find Larissa unconscious on the floor and comforts her while Isabelle continues to watch them. When Larissa mentions Isabelle again, Matt decides to go over and talk to Anne. Next door, he finds the house is completely empty, but can smell something strange coming from upstairs. He goes to Isabelle's room and looks at Larissa through the window to assure her there is no one here. But when he accidentally bumps the closet, he finds Isabelle's dead body and runs back to the house to call 911. After the police take away Isabelle's body, they tell Matt that it seems like she died around 2 weeks earlier, the same time the couple moved into the new house. They suspect Anne must know something about the death, and they ask Matt to call them if he sees her around again. Matt returns to his bedroom and slips into bed beside a seemingly changed Larissa, but not noticing this, Matt assures her that everything is okay and begins to kiss her. Meanwhile, we see Larissa tied to a chair in Isabelle's room, trying to scream for help, and then comes back into the room and apologizes to her for abandoning her earlier. Matt spots Anne through the window and tells Larissa, not realizing it is Isabelle inside his wife's body. When he calls the police to alert them Anne is back, the officer tells him that it is impossible as he is looking at Anne's body right now, who would slit her throat to take her own life. Anne's spirit apologizes for killing Isabelle, saying she wanted to set her free, before realizing it is not Isabelle, but Larissa. Meanwhile, as Matt realizes the truth, Isabelle attacks him, saying she wants Larissa's life. He rushes next door and finds Larissa's body, but Isabelle attacks him again. Matt turns to Larissa and begs her to choose life as he struggles to keep Isabelle away from her body, but the police then burst in the room and shoot at them. Larissa wakes up in the hospital, where the doctors tell her she died for a few minutes, but luckily they were able to resuscitate her, and now the couple have a new baby boy. Once the new family is at home, Matt asked Larissa what she saw when she was dead, and we see Isabelle sitting back in the window, smirking. That was all from the video. Subscribe for more content like this, and leave a like to help the channel out. Also, leave a comment if you want us to recap your favorite movie. Take care.